Thank you. The whips have agreed that the next debates will be on the items 18, and that's the motion on planning for people, not profits, followed by item 19, the motion on 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, and then paragraph 4 of report number 1 dealing with housing rents. I now call upon Councillor Carpenter to formally move and Councillor Belton to second the motion in their name on planning for people, not for profit. Councillors.
Madam Mayor, formally moved.
Thank you. So could I call on Councillor Carpenter to speak?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, I would hope that this motion is one which the Council can adopt unanimously, because all it asks is that the Council should follow its adopted planning policies. We have tabled the motion because of the concerns that have been expressed by the Wandsworth Amenity Societies and others that the Planning Applications Committee is not giving full weight to the Council's adopted planning policies. The Council's planning policies are developed through a rigorous process involving public hearings by the Planning Inspectorate to ensure that the Council's policies represent a fair balance between the interests of the various parties involved: Wandsworth residents, Wandsworth businesses, and the developers of the sites. Once they have gone through that process and are adopted by the policy, the Planning Inspectorate is required to give them full weight in considering any appeals. We believe that the same full weight should be given to the adopted planning policies by officers and members of the Planning Applications Committee when considering whether to approve individual planning applications, so as to preserve a level playing field between the various interested parties. Concerns have been expressed that in a number of high-profile cases, the latest of which we are considering today in report number 4 from the Planning Applications Committee, namely the former Army Cadet Force building in Buckhold Road, the developers' financial interests have been allowed to trump all other considerations. I have spoken at length to the Planning Applications Committee, the Strategic Planning and Transportation Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and to officers to explain why their current financial appraisal techniques fail to properly capture developers' actual costs and benefits. Now, I do have some credibility in this matter. Some 20 years ago, I ran Cable and Wireless's capital allocation programme, allocating £1 billion of spend every year to competing projects across the globe. It is the appraisal methods that we developed then, and which are standard commercial practice now, that I have been urging Wandsworth to adopt. Wandsworth's current appraisal methods assume that developments are financed 100% by equity, whereas in practice they are financed by a mixture of debt and equity. Because of the lower cost of debt, a lower overall financial return is required for the development to be financially viable. I calculate that on average, Wandsworth is probably leaving some 5% of the value of a development on the table when it comes to negotiate Section 106 agreements with developers. In the case of the Buckhold Road site, this will be enough to lift the affordable housing percentage from a derisory 5% to 20%, still below our planning target levels of 33%. Now, even if we do our sums properly, should we still give planning permissions to developments which fail to comply with other key Wandsworth planning policies, such as overall height and amenity provision? My answer to that is no. Why? The property market is inherently cyclical. Despite their recent increases, London property prices are still 15% below their 2008 peak in real terms, and can be expected to go higher. If we can't get a development that complies with our policies now, all we have to do is wait. And in the long term, real rise in property prices will make a planning policy compliant development affordable to the developer in due course. When we give a development planning permission, we're stuck with it for 30 to 50 years. Why not wait 5 years for a better development to come along? If we look at the recent example of the Battersea Power Station development, we expected the penthouse apartments to be marketed at around 10 million each. The developers have achieved 30 million. £20 million buys an awful lot of affordable housing, and there are several penthouse apartments, not just one in that development. In conclusion, Madam Mayor, Wandsworth has a well-developed set of planning policies designed to balance the interests of Wandsworth residents, businesses and site developers. Can we please just get on and implement them and not sell the interests of Wandsworth residents who we all elected to serve short. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cuff.
Thank you, and thank you to Councillor Carpenter for making those points. I think just a very quick overview from what you just said there, Councillor. I'm afraid I don't think we can afford to wait. London needs homes. Wandsworth needs new homes. I don't think waiting for planning applications stalling planning applications is an appropriate service or something that we should be doing given the context of the housing challenge. And I think actually, I'm afraid I can't support anything in this motion set out, but if you had come at this from a point of about affordability, I might have had a lot in common with some of the things you would have said. But I'm afraid in the current context of this motion, as it is before us, it's something that isn't supportive for me, and there's a number of reasons for that, councillors. Firstly, I take contention with your first point in your motion, which is that actually planning is unpopular with the public at large in Wandsworth. I actually don't agree with that. I entirely accept that there are many planning applications which are contentious. It is the nature of planning that it generates interest, it generates concern, and development is a dirty business, it's noisy, it's disruptive to people's lives, and I entirely see why some of our local residents are concerned by the impacts in many, many different ways, and it's our job, our duty to reflect, understand, negotiate, find ways through that. But I think it's the wrong barometer then to say, on the basis of that planning in general in Wandsworth is unpopular. We know for a fact in our Wandsworth resident surveys that it's quite the opposite. We know from the last survey we did back last year, where we asked our residents what they thought of what services they were concerned about in the borough. We know that 46% of them said refuge was a concern. We know that 43% said the parks and keeping the parks cleanly, smart and tidy was important. And we also know that street cleaning is important, 34%. But fundamentally, when it came to planning, only 2 said there was any concern. Not 2%, 2 people said they were concerned with the overall direction of travel of planning in this borough. The residents at large, and there are many, many, many more than are generated from objections, which are fair and important to consider, are, I think, content with the approach that this borough takes. And of course, if they don't like it, they can vote in the next local election, which is coming up in May, and let's see what happens on the doorstep. Now, taking your second point in your motion, affordable housing and the proportions across sites. We all know that land varies in terms of size, in terms of the issues, in terms of the requirements we have in terms of infrastructure. Indeed, your party vary in terms of its own views on affordable housing. I can think of a number of applications that you have tried to overturn and refuse, which have provided generous amounts of affordable housing. It simply isn't the case that you can apply a box to every single scheme and set policies in place which will be applicable directly every time. What I can say, though, is across our borough as a whole, last year we completed 1,098 units, of which 30% of those units were affordable. That is a good record of delivery for this borough, and it's applying it across the borough rather than making the mistake that you make as a party constantly, I think, in this area when you go from a site-by-site basis. You have to look at the totality, the strategic context, and then that way we are delivering. Now, your third point about excessive development, I think the third and the fourth point meld together. I sat in a judging panel for the Wandsworth Designer Awards 2 weeks ago. I have to say I was exceptionally impressed with the exceptional development proposals, architect proposals. We have world-class architects operating this borough, providing world-class public architecture, which is improving Garrett Lane, Upper Richmond Road, the Nine Elms. This is going to make a huge difference, not just to the local residents who live here now, but future residents. I think we can be very proud of the record that we have in this borough. If Councillor Carpenter had set his motion out about affordability, I would have an absolute agreement with him that I'm worried about property prices in London. I'm worried that I saw this week that property prices are predicted to be £600,000 a unit. I'm worried that I saw last week, as Councillor Hogg probably did, that in the BBC there was a research study that showed that with 25 to 35-year-olds, at least 25% of them are living with their parents. I think that's absolutely wrong. I'm also worried that only 6 boroughs in London have got forecast housing to meet the need and supply, which will be increasing over the next 10 years. There is an absolute desperate need to provide more housing. Wandsworth, in its own context, is delivering that housing. Fundamentally, it becomes down to supply and demand, and we need to provide housing not just for now, but for our future residents. And it's absolutely wrong that we should hold off planning applications just because their value might change. The housing crisis is now, it is here. We need to be proactive, not reactive.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Randall.
Thank you. So I am actually going to talk about affordable housing. I'm sure Councillor Cuff won't be surprised to hear me say it. And I'm going to talk about the way I feel that the opportunity to provide more affordable housing in this borough falls on the wrong side of the fence in 2 different ways. First of all, it's looking at those individual developments that come really almost every cycle now, where we approve applications where the level of affordable housing is far, far, far below the 33% that is in our policy. And the number of applications that we've had come back over the years who have come back to us to reduce that low level of affordable housing as well, sometimes to even 0. We've had many applications that have come through like this. And yet Councillor Cuff talks about we're delivering the housing that London needs. But if we look at Battersea Power Station and those houses that have been sold there and the flats that have been sold there in the first tranche, a high proportion of those have gone to overseas buyers. Now, I have no argument with people from overseas buying, but we need to understand that the applications that we are approving are not necessarily providing the housing that is needed for London's, the people of London. My daughter falls into that 25 to 35 band. She's 26, and she was out the other day with 10 of her friends, and 9 of them still live at home with their parents, and they have no prospect of going out and affording somewhere to buy, and even often affording somewhere to rent. And it's a real problem. And what we need to do is to make sure that our planning applications come through with properties that local people can buy, and not at these exorbitant prices that are well beyond their reach. So that's one way in which I feel we need to stick to our planning policies. I understand the economic need to get the construction industry moving and that way providing jobs. But if what we end up with is a whole infrastructure that actually is not designed to meet local needs, we have that, as Councillor Carpenter said, for 30, 50, maybe even longer, a longer period of time. And the second side in which affordable housing falls on the other side of the fence is with the new introduction of the Community Infrastructure Levy. And the problem with that is that, one, in Wandsworth it's quite high, and the other is that it's limited in the way that it can be applied. So on large developments, we may be getting £5–7 million in infrastructure levy, but it goes on roads and schools and things like this, and doesn't add to the ability to build affordable houses. And often the very existence of the infrastructure levy causes a development to become unviable and therefore reduces the amount of affordable housing on that development. And so I think that's the second way in which affordable housing, it seems to me, gets pushed to the bottom of the pile all the time. And I think our motion really seeks to address that, in that we have to see the amount of affordable housing increased. Councillor Cuff talks about as we achieved 30% of affordable housing, but the policy applies to individual developments. There are many developments, we know, we've approved them. We've approved the extra care housing in our wards and other places, council-led applications, which are 100% affordable, and nobody's denying that. But the London Plan and our own planning documents have given an estimation that we need to have 33% or more affordable housing in developments, and that's what we should be aiming for. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And can I just say, as this is my first council meeting since you ascended the dais. It's wonderful to see you up there. And it's great to see you controlling the meeting. Well done. Mr. Mayor, I take great pleasure and pride in speaking in this debate because it's a very pressing issue. A lot of sense has actually been spoken on all sides. And a lot of trite nonsense has also been spoken, but I'll try and gloss over that. Until the Wendells arrived in Wandsworth, and Mr. Mayor, you have a tapestry in your parlour that depicts the arrival of the Wendells in Wandsworth some 1,200 years ago. The locals here were pretty much living in burrows. And it's nice to have this motion from Bilbo Carpenter and Frodo Belton trying to get us back to Middle-earth. But times have changed. We don't live in burrows anymore. The Wendells started living in thatched huts. And if we come up to the last century, after the war, there was a lot of damage in the East End of London. And the Labour Party and Herbert Crossman of the time decided that these people...
Get your history straight. I think you mean Morrison.
Yeah.
Yes. Crossman was an idiot in Harrow, sorry. You're absolutely right. They built in Roehampton, they built 11-storey blocks in Roehampton. They built 23-storey blocks in Battersea. So these high-rise blocks are not new. They're not a phenomenon of the 21st century. They've been around for 50, 60 years. But since the 50s, Labour's record on housing has been nothing short of woeful. We had Wilson's white heat of technology in the 60s, house building ground to a halt.
1,000 were built, record. You're just wrong.
Tony Blair said he was going to build 1 million new homes a year at the beginning of the 21st century. And in the words of that immortal bard, Jeremy Clarkson, the one-eyed Scottish idiot tried to trump that by saying we'll build 2 million homes a year. House building just slumped and slumped at the beginning of this century. And during the first decade of the century, we had untrammelled immigration. Untrammelled. And in fact, Jack Straw, a few weeks ago, apologised for it and said that the Labour government had got it wrong. But the immigrants have come here, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but they are here, and they've picked up certain British habits. And one of the most favourite British habits is breeding. And we have a baby boom. The population is increasing quite significantly. That's why we're having to build new schools in the borough. But we have to house these people. In the course of the afternoon, I did some research, and I found that, for example, the Republic of Kazakhstan has 15.5 people per square mile. The Central African Republic has 18.5 people per square mile. The United States of America has 88.6 people per square mile. France has 301 people per square mile. Germany, 583. The UK, 662 people per square mile. Berlin, 9,000. We'll get on to the cities now. Berlin has 9,900 people per square mile. Jakarta, 11,350 people per square mile. London, 13,690 people per square mile. Tokyo, 16,000. And I'll go to two major cities. New York City, 27,500 people per square mile. Paris, 55,000 people per square mile. And here in the borough of Wandsworth, we have 23,000 people per square mile. We have to house them somewhere. The boroughs have gone. We can't expand out anymore. I'm afraid we're left with going up. It's not going to be general policy, but where we need to do it, we have to say yes, we must have some tall blocks to allow our children to live close by to us. Now, the motion talked about planning for people and not for profits, and I thought, wow, it's like being back at the Students' Union. It's really knockabout schoolboy politics, this, and I should expect no better from a disjointed, dysfunctional, split opposition that we have over here. You can't face the real world. People... No idea, it's not here. People need somewhere to live. We need to be able to provide the homes for them to live. You've had the luxury of being in opposition for 38 years. Carry on like this. You'll have that luxury for a lot longer to come.
Councillor Belton.
I think in the immortal words, follow that. I find it a little bit difficult. So ignoring much of that, can I just say, I think we've covered the field fairly well, but there are a couple of things I want to mention. If Councillor Cuffe really wants to confuse the popularity of planning across the board, and I'm very proud of my role in that, being a member of it for you know how long, and done a reasonably good job, I think, then he can. But I think he's kidding himself if he thinks that many of the very dense overdevelopment high-rise blocks in town centres are popular. I suspect that he'd find a little bit of trouble in finding too many people in, say, Northcote, even if though I guarantee that they're going to vote Tory. I'm not doubt about that. That doesn't prove anything. But I doubt whether many of them would be in favour of 42 stories on Clapham Junction approach, which this council was kind of supporting at one time. So popularity in general does not equate to popularity about specifics. And I think you'll find, rather depressingly, that a fair proportion of the population out there thinks that developers have an easy ride with Wandsworth Council. And I have to say this, not normally in my line, but if you look at the answers to questions asked by Councillor Hogg about the dealings of one well-known ex-councillor of this borough and his dealings with developers, you do think that they get a rather quick and immediate response. People looking at me surprised. Ex-Councillor Bingle, if you want to know the name. So I think that's a general perception. Secondly, when Councillor Cuffe says delay is not possible or not desirable because of the need for housing, and Councillor Knowles talks about the expanding population, hasn't he noticed we've got an enormously expanded housing, property market out there, and hasn't he noticed that it's had no impact of the kind that he's talking about? All these developments, as someone from over this side heckled, or many of them are going to foreign speculative purchasers. Everyone in this room gets this kind of thing through their letterbox every day. This is just today's, and it says 16% increase in the number of inquiries from corporates, says delighted estate agent of Clapham Junction. The housing just isn't going to the people that we all think need it. And what is more, we all know that none of the developments that are going up are going to make any impact. We actually know that. Even if you like to put it in, there's more housing being developed and that we need it, we all know that it won't go to where it's needed. Take Battersea Wharf, for instance. 70%, I think, of the properties bought in the Battersea Wharf area are bought for buy-to-rent. Some agent for a small development across the road was proud of the fact that 70% of the properties he was selling are going to people who are going to move in and live there. How fantastic. I mean, that's a small development, mind you, and he was contrasting it with the place across the road. No, it's not popular. And I think one of the problems is that none of us dare mention the elephant in the room. None of us. The Labour Party, I'm afraid, because it's a little bit too scared nowadays, and the Tory Party, because you just don't see it. But we've just stopped taxing property. It's just become a complete bonanza. So that, I don't know, many of you won't have read left-wing rags like The Observer, but there was a big coverage of Bishop's Avenue last week in The Observer, of the literally tens of houses worth many million each, just lying there empty, because they don't cost anything to buy. I mean, they cost a capital of money, but they don't cost anything to keep. You just sit on a rising asset. You can buy it from wherever you are in the world, sit on a rising and decaying asset. And we don't have any property taxes at all. I mean, you council tax. What does council tax mean to the kind of rich people we're talking about here? And of course you played your part in that. The only decent property tax we had was the old-fashioned rates, and you abolished it and replaced it with a poll tax, and look how popular that was. No, we don't have a property tax, and until we do have a sensible property tax, we're faced with two problems. One is that we can't pay for local government, which is another one of my problems of relating earlier. We can't pay for local government, therefore we can't withstand a tax from central government about what we do. And secondly, it's the reverse of the bedroom tax, if you like. There's Councillor Cooper will be proud of how we force relatively poor people to forego that small spare room they've got. And yet, the affluent amongst his owner-occupiers, including me, I'm not denying the fact, can sit on hundreds of spare bedrooms relatively untaxed. That's the real problem. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Heaster.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Interesting that Councillor Belton said, well, follow that. Very wide-ranging debate, very interesting. I must say, when I saw the title, Planning for People, Not Profits, my heckles went up a bit because, quite frankly, I thought this was going to be a bit more political, this debate, than perhaps it has been. But I must say that I think it's drawn out a little bit the psyche of the Labour Party still, which some of us have been in this chamber for a few decades, and we've seen it when actually the Labour Party had control of this authority. And I remember when Councillor Belton was on the planning committee and was chairman of the planning committee, that he often refused planning permission because the applicants didn't give enough community gain. And of course that meant that the site didn't get developed very quickly, backwards and forwards like yo-yos. I also remember at the same time, and this issue about homes and the priority it's given in local government has been with us for ages. It sort of goes like the tide, backwards and forwards. And it seems to be a bit of the flavour of the month at the present time. But in the 70s, it was the flavour of the month. And the then Labour group here decided the best way of dealing with that was to employ more people, I think they were called property purchasers, and to buy as much up as they could. The only trouble was they had enough money to buy the places, but it didn't have enough money to actually do them up. So the consequence of that was that they were all left sort of boarded up. Couple that with the planning policy of being a bit anti, unless you've got community gains, was a downward spiral, which I'm pleased to say helped the Conservative Party get control of the council. But profit is a very important thing. And I'm surprised that the motion sort of knocks a bit this whole thing about profit. It seems to me as though you don't really like profit. You obviously don't really like tall buildings, and you obviously want to do more about social housing. Well, that's all very interesting politics, but the reality is today that we have got one of the most bubbly, most positive economies going on in this borough in the world, I think, let alone just in London, South London, certainly in the country. You don't have to go down any street at all without seeing work going on with lofts being converted and new basements being dug out. Look at Nine Elms. What would you do there if we didn't have tall buildings? What would you do there, as I understand, that the Ballymore development there that's gone along quite well, we obviously have arrangements there, not just about whether there are affordable houses or not, but also an overage arrangement, and they just announced that they've done so well out of their buildings that they're going to give us £40 million. And that, of course, will go to building new affordable homes. So profits actually are quite a good thing, really, Labour Party. because they do a lot of things. They generate prosperity. They generate new jobs, they generate homes, they generate better community spirit, better leisure facilities, all sorts of activities that are going on in all these bigger developments, not just in Nine Elms, which is a huge success story, but indeed in all the other areas of the borough, lots and lots of activity taking place. The concept about the affordable housing, all that's been mentioned is about targets, percentages. The reality is that over the last 5 years, we've actually built to all those targets. Forget about an individual building not being at 50% or 30% or 15%, but overall, the targets that we've been set, we've beaten. We've beaten by about 26% over the last 5 years. Not consistently, up and down, but over the last 5 years, 26%. So the issue about affordable housing, although it's important, very important, because you want to have the right blend, isn't actually quite the sort of priority that you actually make out or think it is. We are doing very well in this borough, and indeed the pipeline of planning applications that are going through at the present time demonstrate very clearly that over the next few years we will still be building lots and lots of new homes in the borough, and we will be beating the figures in relation to affordable housing. So don't get stuck into where you ended up in the 70s,
Councillor.
being anti-making profits, anti-prosperity in effect, because it isn't going to work for you. This borough is bubbling. This borough is doing a very good job on what it does on its planning, and you shouldn't interfere with it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we need to look at this debate in the overall London context, because we are one of the 32 boroughs, and the housing and other challenges facing London are the same challenges facing us. We cannot look at our planning policies and our planning deliveries in isolation from other London boroughs. London's population is growing, and by 2016 is set to grow to 8.7 million. The usual drift from London at various points in people's life cycle of leaving London to go out to suburbs or provinces is not happening. A large number of people in London are staying put, and more people are being attracted to London. London's economy is growing at the same time, and of course it now represents virtually nearly a quarter of the national GDP. Both those things are positive as well as throw up challenges. And in order to meet those challenges, we have to relook at how we deal with meeting those challenges. London's extent isn't growing. Councillor Knowles referred to that in his speech. We are not expanding geographically, so we are going to have to look at intensifying the land use in London. And it's not me alone who's saying this. London leaders across the capital, Labour and Conservative, inner and outer, are all looking at it in those terms. There are Labour authorities looking at this with imagination. Our own neighbour in Lambeth, the record on tall buildings is not very far from our record on tall buildings. Even provincial Ealing would like to have tall buildings, because in a sense they are grappling with the reality of London's pressures. And what the opposition's motion doesn't do is does not address the underlying need in London to provide more housing and diverse housing. I also say that London has thrived on change, as has this borough. Many of us will remember what the Riverside looked like once, and we now know what it looks like now. You may take a view that you don't like what it looks like, but it is actually providing homes and jobs. It has opened up the riverfront. It has made it more accessible to more people than it ever was when it was dirty industrial uses, which had long passed their sell-by date. What Councillor Heaster mentioned, Nine Elms, and yes, what is happening there is hugely exciting. And one of the things that I learned from planning is that at planning application stage, developments get slated by lots of people, and once they're built and done, often they become much loved. In my experience, a little tiny development off Roehampton High Street called Angel Mews much slated and much derided, found that one of its early occupier was one of the objectors to that particular development. The Swish building in my own ward, much slated, but now much loved. The ICL Tower in Putney is now an icon for many, and it has found from derelict office to thriving home use and has spawned a nighttime and a daytime economy in the Putney Piazza. So change is good, and change is what we have achieved in large parts of our borough. I just also say that there was a mention by Councillor Randall about the lack of infrastructure and then talking about lack of affordable housing. In planning, it is about balancing these things. I mean, the council has achieved enormous successes in the infrastructure addition to this borough. NLE is one big ticket item, but longer trains, longer platforms, station improvements, they are all additions to our infrastructure to meet the increasing needs of our population and the needs of an increasing population. Our investment in schools is adding to the infrastructure to meet those challenges. And all of these things have to be paid for at various points, and largely through the development process. That is how it's done. You can't pay for everything out of the same development process, so you have to prioritize. And I think Councillor Heaster mentioned that our delivery on affordable housing has, over a period of time, achieved all the targets that are set. And we will continue to do that. And I think what the real challenge we now face and we need to address is to provide different affordable housing products. It isn't just one-size-fits-all type of affordable housing. It isn't just more and more council housing building, although we've done some of that too. And we intend to do some of that too. And the Roehampton and Winstanley regenerations are examples of grappling with the challenge and finding imaginative solutions to the problem, both satisfying local needs, addressing the concerns, and building in both good outcomes for people in terms of schools, jobs, and so on, as well as good housing. Mr. Mayor, the second part of the motion is almost, it's a strange one. I thought the Planning Applications Committee has exactly that role. It has to look at an application in the round, and that is what it does. But finally, if I may say so, Mr. Mayor, ever since the cave dweller found that somebody had built a hut, I think the debate on height started. As far as we are concerned on this side, we left the cave a long time ago.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can I just start by saying, actually, we set out here to look for agreement across the council chamber, and all we are doing in this resolution is reinforcing and reiterating Wandsworth Council's existing planning policy guidelines. We want to return to square one as a guideline for what we do in this borough. And the reason why we're doing that is, as I say, I don't think there's any great disagreement. If I may, I'll just slightly correct Councillor Cuff when he implies that we have a blanket opposition to planning. We don't. Slightly correct Councillor Heaster when he implies that we have a blanket opposition to profits. We don't. In a mixed economy, some profit is obviously necessary and good. But when you get to Planning Applications Committee, the people of this borough should come first, is what we are trying to say to you this evening. And we don't want to lapse into some suggestion of being anti-development. That is not desirable, because we need homes, we need modernisation, we need construction that enhances community. But we also want to protect the heritage and look of this borough. We also want to ensure good quality design. We also want to make sure that housing provision is fit for purpose, and that means it must include at least two things: a good proportion of social housing and a good proportion of housing which is within the reach, which is affordable for our grown-up children and others in this borough. Now, what's gone wrong then? Where is the absence then of this sustainable, well-developed, well-designed kind of development? I have to say there are some good designs in the borough, just as Councillor Cuff says, but I also have to say that there are some places where I think, as a borough, we have shortchanged the borough in terms of good design, and we have not always insisted on it in the way that we should. On heritage, I do recall, and it does worry me, the leader of this council saying that if heritage is survived, it has to earn its keep. And when it comes to the need for affordable housing, and I just reinforce this for Councillor Cuff, it is in our resolution and it is absolutely central to what we're arguing. Part of the problem is affordable housing is currently being defined as 80% of market value. That puts it way beyond the reach in Wandsworth of most Wandsworth residents, actually. Certainly those that are trying, first of all, to get on the property ladder. So there is something else. There is a genuinely affordable type of housing which we need to strive for, which is not the straightforward affordable housing as defined. And the way to get it, I think, is to make sure you get the right mix. If you get the right mix in each development or in a group of developments in an area, then you are beginning to move towards the kind of affordability, genuine affordability, which we need in this borough and which we should be striving for. The right mix includes social housing. Actually, I think it probably includes properly regulated private rented sector housing as well. But in particular, it includes homes that you can afford to buy at manageable prices, in particular, especially for the single and the young couples in this borough who need to get on that property ladder. They've all got to be in the mix. And I think we're letting people down. Actually, I think all these things are provided for in our rules, our planning guidance, by and large, most of them, but we just don't walk the talk. We're letting people down and we are not applying the rules as we should. And there's one, just as a postscript to all this, one thing we could do which would get us back on the straight and narrow, which is all we're asking for this evening. One thing we could do is change one small rule in this council. And that is to say, neighbours of new developments, neighbours of new schemes, should have the right, as they do in most councils throughout Britain, as they do in every borough in London, to go to the Planning Applications Committee, make a deputation and express their concerns and make a presentation to the committee. That's forbidden in Wandsworth at the moment, almost uniquely. Just make that change and the people of this borough would speak and keep this council on the straight and narrow, and we'd stick up for our own planning rules.
Thank you, Councillor. Right, councillors, the motion now before the council is that proposed by Councillor Carpenter and seconded by Councillor Belton, as set out in the item 18 of the agenda. Please indicate by a show of hands those for the motion. Thank you. Okay. And 13.
Okay, it's 34.
Right, those for the motion, motion 13, those against the motion 35. Result is that the motion is lost.